Nightmare on the Night Shift. My dad has been an MTA subway station manager for 35 years. With his role, there always needs to be a manager on duty, which means he's worked nearly every possible shift, including a lot of nights. During these shifts, most trains are empty, something he often appreciates about the late hours. Over the years, he's gathered a collection of funny and odd stories, but one incident stands out as truly chilling. One night, around 3 a.m., he boarded a train alone to head to his office at another station. At the next stop, a tall, thin man with pale skin, wearing a heavy jacket and a beanie, boarded the train. The man gave my dad a quick glance, then settled in the far corner. My dad noticed the man's frequent glances in his direction, which made him uncomfortable. When the train reached my dad's stop, he got off, and to his dismay, the man followed. My dad walked to his office, unlocked the door and quickly stepped inside, locking it behind him. Looking out, he could see the man pacing about 50 feet away. Moments later, someone tried turning the doorknob. After realizing it was locked, they began to knock. Softly at first. My dad called out, "Who is it?" The person replied, "I just want to talk." Trusting his instincts, my dad told the person to leave. The knocking continued for 5 tense minutes. My dad finally checked his security monitors, switching to the camera pointing at his office door. Sure enough, the man in the beanie and jacket stood there, knocking. Just as he brought up the feed, the man turned and walked away. After waiting about half an hour, my dad decided to catch the next train. He checked the cameras to ensure the coast was clear, then left the office and headed down to the platform. As he boarded the train and settled in, he noticed, to his horror, the same man descending the stairs, heading toward him. The man entered the same car and sat across from my dad, a few seats to his right. My dad did his best to ignore the man, but he could feel the man's gaze locked onto him. At one point, he met the man's eyes and offered a brief nod and a light smile, hoping to ease the tension. The man, however, continued to stare, unblinking, all the way to the next station. My dad kept his eyes forward, refusing to look back. If you're wondering why he didn't confront the man, it's because, despite his size, my dad has always been a gentle giant, friendly, non-confrontational. Besides, he feared the man might be armed, and any misstep could turn deadly. When the train reached the next stop, my dad quickly exited and hurried up to the street, glancing over his shoulder. The man was following him. Desperate, my dad spotted an open Wendy's nearby and went inside, sitting down to catch his breath. Moments later, the man approached the window, peering at him through the glass for a solid 10 seconds, before finally turning and walking away down the street. Thinking it was over, my dad finished his break and went to his final station of the night. But just as he settled into his office, he checked the cameras again, feeling on edge. To his horror, there was the same man, pacing outside the station about 30 feet from the office. Then the man stopped, looked directly at the camera, and stared into it, unmoving, for nearly a full minute. Finally, he lowered his head and walked away, disappearing into the night. My dad never saw him again. To this day, my dad doesn't know what the man wanted. Was he homeless, disturbed, dangerous? Whatever the reason, it was an encounter that still sends chills down his spine. A dangerous encounter on the late-night subway. It was around Christmas in New York City, and my 3 friends and I didn't decide to call it a night until about 2 in the morning. We hopped on the first subway train that came our way, and, as expected, it was practically empty. By this point, we'd sobered up quite a bit, and were ready to get home. But our peaceful ride quickly turned unsettling. Suddenly, we heard a commotion coming from the next car. Peering through the glass between the cars, we saw 2 hooded figures, young men, maybe even teenagers, standing uncomfortably close to a woman who was seated and screaming for help. I suggested we go over and handle it ourselves, but as my friend and I got a bit closer, we noticed that the men were armed with handguns. Realizing how dangerous the situation was, I quickly motioned for my friends to follow me, and we made our way to the next car, hoping to put some distance between us and the armed men. Just before we moved, I glanced back and saw one of the men pointing in our direction. Then they started following us. We ran through at least 3 different cars, with the 2 men pursuing us until the train finally stopped at the next station. We bolted out of the train and dashed through the dimly lit station, each of us searching for a place to hide. I ended up getting separated from my friends, so I crouched behind a garbage can, hoping it would be enough to keep me hidden. I could hear their footsteps echoing on the tiled floor, getting closer. Peeking through the small opening between the garbage can and the wall, I could see them more clearly now. One was black, and the other was Indian. They both looked young, definitely no older than teenagers. At first, I thought they were simply trying to rob us, but then I heard one of them say, "If you find them, kill them." The shock of those words nearly made me give myself away. I almost toppled the garbage can as I ducked back down. Somehow, though, they didn't spot me. After a few tense moments, they seemed to give up on their search in that area and moved away. Luckily, they didn't have their guns drawn at that point. Once I was sure they were gone, I darted in the opposite direction and eventually spotted my friends hiding behind a large column. They waved me over, and I joined them behind another pole nearby. We waited there, keeping as quiet as possible, until we thought it was safe to leave. What really shocked us came after we spotted the woman from the train, the one we thought was in danger. She walked right over to the 2 men and called out, "Where are they? Don't tell me you lost them!" The 2 men reappeared from around the corner, meeting up with her. Although we couldn't catch every word, it was clear they knew each other. The 3 of them eventually headed back down to the platform, presumably waiting to catch another train and set up their trap again. At the very least, we managed to call the police and report the incident. But to this day, I don't know if they were ever caught. A terrifying subway encounter. My name is Danny. I'm 22 years old, and what I'm about to share was the most horrifying experience of my life. I live and work in New York City, and since I don't own a car, my primary mode of transportation is the subway. One Saturday night, after leaving a party, I headed home in the middle of the night. This was routine for me, as I took the subway alone at night almost every other weekend. While walking down the steps into the deserted underground station, I felt the familiar chill of the empty space around me. The station was narrow and tightly enclosed, making every sound echo sharply. As I made my way down, I could sense the eerie feeling of being watched. Occasionally, I'd hear a strange metallic bang from somewhere in the distance, adding to the tension. I was early for the next train, so I sat on a bench to wait. That's when I heard something that sent a shiver down my spine, a voice calling out, "Over here, buddy!" I turned and saw a man standing on the tracks inside the tunnel, just at the edge, leaning out and staring at me. He looked filthy, probably in his early 40s, with a ghastly yellow smile showing several missing teeth. I could tell his hygiene was poor even from where I sat. Doing my best to ignore him, I kept my gaze away, hoping he'd go away. But he didn't. Instead, laughter echoed from the tunnel, and then another man appeared beside him, his face just as unkempt and grimy. This one grinned as well and called out, "Come hang out with us in the tunnel." Their stares were unwavering, locked onto me with an intensity that felt almost predatory. I tried to remain calm and focused on the platform, just waiting for the train. But then, in my peripheral vision, I saw one of them duck back into the tunnel, only to return moments later with a third face, a lifeless, hunched figure that he seemed to be holding up. I took a closer look and nearly choked in horror. He was holding what appeared to be a decapitated head. Just then, the sound of the approaching train felt like a huge weight lifting off my shoulders. I stood up, ready to board, but as I got closer to the edge, I glanced down the tracks and had to fight the urge to throw up. The 2 men were retreating into the darkness, one of them holding the head up high as if it were some kind of trophy. They disappeared into the shadows of the tunnel just as the train pulled up. I boarded the first car, planning to warn the conductor. I couldn't bear the thought of staying at that station a moment longer. As the train began moving, I looked back and saw legs descending the stairs toward the platform, though I couldn't make out who it was. Then, as we moved further into the tunnel, I caught sight of a group of men huddled close to the railing, mere inches away from the window. They were all staring directly at me. In a panic, I pounded on the conductor's door, yelling that it was an emergency. He opened the door, and I quickly explained what I had seen. He immediately radioed the station operator and notified someone higher up in the company. I have no idea what happened afterward, but I was grateful to be out of that station, even if I was left wondering what I had just witnessed.